It just seemed like everything was happening all at once.
2017 was a pretty challenging year for Maisha Ross. The single mom welcomed her third child.
I ended up going on maternity leave, and I was actually off without pay for a couple weeks. Right when I returned from maternity leave, I was in a car accident too, totaled my vehicle. I was in the car with my newborn. So I had a lot of stuff going on.
Then a knock at the door brought more bad news.
Yeah, there was a process server who came and knocked on my door and served me with a foreclosure notice. And of course, I freaked out.
Maisha had fallen behind on a lot of her bills, but she said she'd work something out with the mortgage company.
But this was the HOA, and I had no idea that an HOA could foreclose on you.
Maisha's foreclosure lawsuit did not come from her mortgage company. It came from her HOA. It's called the Timbers Homeowners Association 1. And when she saw the amount the HOA said she owed, it was way more than she expected.
I didn't know it had gotten that bad. With the late fees, and then they would charge interest, it just kind of kept snowballing.
This started a legal fight with the HOA that has lasted more than 4 years. Maisha, a single mom of 3, filed for bankruptcy twice to try to save her home.
I was excited to own a home, but just dealing with this HOA has just made it horrible.
Maisha and her neighbors at the Timbers are required to pay $355 each month. That helps keep up the place, pays for insurance and water, and pays for shared amenities like the pools. If they don't pay for the equivalent of 6 months, the law allows the Timbers and all other HOAs in Colorado to file for judicial foreclosure. HOAs have filed more than 2,400 foreclosure cases across Colorado since 2018, according to an analysis of court data by Rocky Mountain PBS and ProPublica. And in the Timbers, we found this kind of thing happens a lot. It happened not only to Maisha, it happened to Mary and Janet and Jane and quite a few other people. Court records show that the Timbers HOA has filed 41 foreclosure cases against its residents since 2018. Some residents like Maisha have been sued more than once. To understand why, we went to the Timbers and we started knocking on doors.
It's like every time I turned around, I had fees adding up, legal fees.
Just multiplies.
That's why we couldn't catch up and we kept getting late fees.
It's like you get in this hole and they just can't get out. And it's just wrong. I just think it's wrong.
The board of directors, the group of neighbors in the Timbers elected to make decisions for the community, say before these cases were filed, too many people in the neighborhood were not paying their dues. At one point, the board says homeowners were $200,000 behind, and necessary repairs were getting delayed. Water lines were routinely bursting, roofs and parking lots needed fixing. One of the complex's pools sat broken and unused. By changing collection attorneys, the HOA says it has brought delinquencies down from $200,000 to less than $65,000. And the HOA says a lot of these long-delayed repairs have now gotten done. That progress has come at a great cost to some neighbors.
I don't know that I could have done anything else.
Take Mary Kunick, for example.
I didn't realize I could lose my home for falling behind a few months.
Court documents show when the Timbers got a default judgment for foreclosure on her home in 2018, Mary and her late husband owed the HOA just $480 in unpaid dues and fees. But that $480 total grew to $5,300 after adding in attorney's fees and legal costs. Then it grew even more to $10,000 a few months later. Mary says her husband had to borrow the money. They were just 3 days away from losing their home to an auction.
At first it was a denial. It's like, oh, that's just a threat. They can't take away your home. And then as things progressed, yes, they can take away your home. It's disappointing. I felt like I was involved in my community and I thought I had some value, but this had nothing to do with your intrinsic value. This was all business.
In many homeowners association cases I've seen, the bulk of the amount that the association is trying to collect is attorney's fees. It makes it much more difficult for the homeowner to preserve their home.
Jose Vasquez is an attorney at Colorado Legal Services. He represents low-income clients in consumer cases, including homeowners facing foreclosure. He didn't represent any of these Timbers homeowners, but we talked with him about what he's seen because, to be clear, the Timbers is not the only HOA taking its homeowners to court, not by a long shot. Rocky Mountain PBS and ProPublica found that since 2018, more than 200 foreclosure cases have resulted in properties getting sold at sheriff sales like this one.
This is for the real property known as 10820 West.
4 of those sales have involved properties at the Timbers.
File company bids $30,000.
So ultimately, the homeowner bears the burden of all this.
It was a miserable couple years for both of us.
Janet James and her late husband Edward almost lost their townhouse in the Timbers last year, and it was all over a fight over a $25 late fee. Even though Janet and Edward made all of their monthly payments in the year leading up to their foreclosure case, the HOA was charging them late fees and processing fees every month, all because Edward refused to pay that late fee. Edward kept receipts he believed showed he had paid on time, but the HOA's property managers disagreed with him because they said they received the payment late. He argued and argued, but the HOA would not budge.
He was stubborn and wasn't going to pay it, even though it was very minor. And had he just paid it.
In the end, Janet and Edward had to borrow more than $7,700 to save their home from a sheriff's sale. About $7,000 of that total was billed by the HOA's attorney.
He was sort of that old-fashioned opinion that if he felt like he did the right thing, that it would all be okay. And it wasn't okay. It was not okay.
The Timbers told us they couldn't answer questions about any of these cases, quote, without consent from the specific member. So Maisha Ross, Mary Kunick, and Janet James each signed notarized waivers that allowed the Timbers to speak with us about their cases. But the association again declined to answer questions, saying they would need even more paperwork signed before they could talk about these foreclosures.
I just think the HOAs have too much power.
Betsy Wilson's mom, Jane, lived at the Timbers for more than 40 years.
She was just a really good, strong woman with lots of friends and worked hard and did right by people.
Jane died in April of last year on her 86th birthday, but not even her death could stop the HOA's effort to foreclose. Jane had automatic payments set up for the HOA, but she was dealing with some health problems, and Betsy says she didn't notice the payments weren't coming out. Betsy says she found some documents showing the HOA was suing her mom a few months after she died.
It was the foreclosure on the house, and I had no idea that it was going on.
It turns out Jane was never served in person with a foreclosure case by the HOA. Court documents show that when the HOA couldn't find Jane to give her the lawsuit in person, a judge allowed the HOA to notify her in the newspaper instead. Her family had to pay more than $17,000 to save her home.
I'm certain that my mom didn't buy that house 40 years ago to have it taken right out from underneath her, even though I realized that they hadn't been paid, but it was a mistake, and she had paid it all those years faithfully.
We asked the Timbers Board of Directors, the HOA's property manager, and the HOA's collection attorney for interviews to talk about the foreclosures in the community. The HOA sent us written statements instead, reading in part, "The Timbers would rather work with and communicate with its members to resolve delinquency issues rather than rely on legal action. Over the years, we have implemented payment plans and other tools that allow a member to regain their good standing. Unfortunately, not all our members with outstanding obligations are willing to work with us."
They have to get paid somewhere for each of these units to keep up.
For Mary Kunick, it was important to share her story about facing her foreclosure. She says she wants her neighbors to know just how bad it can get if they don't pay their dues.
Isolation and shame don't solve problems. And I want to help be part of the solution so that other people don't end up 3 days away from losing their home.